So we are talking about AI agents, and there does seem to be a little bit of what are AI agents and what do they actually do? So now as the co-founder and CEO of your new company, Sierra, can you tell us what is an AI agent and what can it do?
Yeah, I'll take it maybe from the academic context to the more practical, especially given the audience. So the word agent comes from the word agency, and I like to think about it as having a piece of software and affording it some ability to make decisions and have agency. And that level of autonomy, I think, is really distinctly different than most of the software that preceded it. I like to think of agents in really three categories, and I'll strategically end with the one that my company does, but start with the others. The first is personal agents, and I think that this is a domain that will probably, if you look at companies like OpenAI or Apple or Google, all of them will be working in this domain to make agents that act on your behalf as an individual. There's the proverbial help you plan a vacation, help triage your email inbox within the context of a company. There's probably a lot that agents can do to sort of be that proverbial Iron Man suit for all of us to help us be more productive. I think this is an area that gets a lot of press, but is perhaps the farthest out to really being industrial grade. If you think about how much a personal agent has to generalize to be effective, the technical information security integration challenges are formidable just because the universe of things that we interact with as an individual is so broad. The other class of agent that I think is a bit more practically deployable today is persona-based agents. So agents that can code, agents that can review contracts, agents that can analyze a sales report. At my company, all of our engineers use Cursor, which is one of the companies making coding agents. I've talked to a number of folks in this room about Harvey, which is a legal platform that's doing sort of the work of, at least as I understand it, paralegals, though I'm not a legal expert. So someone at Harvey's probably wincing right now, but probably underselling their product. I think that the reason I say this is a bit more practical right now is within the context of a specific persona, a specific role, the systems you integrate with, how you implement deterministic and probabilistic guardrails, the different people interacting with those agents are just much more well-defined. So you narrow the scope of generalizability and you go from the domain of science to the domain of engineering. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of really interesting applications of those as well. The final category, which is the one my company Sierra works on, is the agent that represents your company's customer experience. And the way I think about it is, if we were here in 1995, I'd probably be pitching you all and making a website, and talking about how until your company has a website, you don't exist digitally. Maybe 10 years ago, I'd be pitching you on you should all have a mobile app and be listed in the App Store, and which would be meaningful for a subset of your companies out there. In 2025, I think every one of your companies will have an AI agent that has your brand at the top of it, that is as complete of a customer experience as your website or your mobile app. If it's an insurance company, it will help you file a claim or add someone to your premium. If it's a consumer electronics company, it might help you with technical support. If you're a telecommunications company, it might do subscription churn management and help convince people not to cancel or upgrade or downgrade their plan. Everything you can do on your website, your agent will do as well. And I think this one's special to me because when you think of the way your CEO might think of the impact of agents, the one with your brand on the top is particularly special and particularly important. And just like if I love going to the Wayback Machine and looking at websites from 1995, and they're surprisingly narrow. They're welcome to the World Wide Web.
Right.
Here's our in-person location.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people you have working on your .coms today at your company, but it's probably fairly big. It's fairly distributed. It's not one project. It's managed by multiple teams because it really is the entirety of your company in a digital form factor. And I think most agents today are largely customer service, and that's really our sweet spot. But I think if we fast forward, we'll look at those agents with the same level of, oh, isn't that cute? And it will come to encompass your entire customer experience. And I think that's really exciting. And anyway, those are the three classes that I see. I don't think the last two are more practically deployable today because, again, I think by narrowing the domain of how much the agent has to generalize, you can engineer your way around some of the structural shortcomings of models today.
Right. And what you're describing sounds really great, and it maybe is some point in the future more widespread, but at the moment, so many enterprises are still sorting through what generative AI means for their organizations, how to get value out of utilizing various language models, sorting through AI governance. And so AI agents seem pretty far off. And we'll go to a polling question in a bit that gets to how many of you are actually using agents. But what's your expectation for when they actually become this future that you're describing? Because right now, it's not quite there.
I think it's important to start with business problems rather than technologies. And I think put another way, I'm not sure it's constructive to start with the premise of how can we deploy more agents at our company, because that's not a goal unto itself. The way I think about it is, like, what are the domains? Well, I'll just take customer service, an area that Sierra serves directly. The average price of a phone call to like a typical consumer brand will be anywhere between $5 and $20. Mainly the labor costs of answering the phone. That for a large consumer brand means that their contact centers are a meaningful operating expense, for almost any large-scale brand. I think that when you think about the opportunities to sort of realize the impact of AI right now, being able to pick up the phone for 1 or even 2 orders of magnitude less money really changes the game in 2 meaningful ways. Number one, obviously, you can save a lot of money, which is great. Your CFOs will be really happy about that. But I think I'm more excited also about the second order effects, which is if you take something that was between $5 and $20, if you talk to, there's a wide range of brands represented in the room, but most interactions aren't worth $5 to $20, which is why it's hard to call most companies on the phone. You've probably talked to your cable company or your insurance company. Try calling Google on the phone. I wouldn't even know how to. I worked there. It's in part because if your average revenue per customer is below the incremental cost of that interaction, it's almost impossible to fulfill, and it just doesn't work. The math doesn't work. I actually think that AI agents will bring down the costs of these personalized interactions so much that it affords the opportunity to actually have, orders of magnitude more personalized conversations with customers. And I bring that up, and it was a sort of a roundabout answer to your question, which is I think there's actually opportunities to deploy these things right now. One of our customers is ADT, the home security company. Probably many of you have them in your house. Next time your alarm's on the fritz, chat with our AI, send me feedback. The T in ADT stands for telegraph. They started as home security over telegraph, which I think is pretty cool just to imagine that value proposition. I imagine myself as an entrepreneur pitching that back in the day. And I think it's pretty neat that now they're in the era of AI agents, and they're over 150 years old, and they're deploying this technology. Every single, I imagine many of your engineering teams are using co-pilots already for their development. I think there are practical solutions now, and I just think that companies, if you don't boil the ocean proverbially, and you say, let's start with some use cases that have solutions now, learn not by saying, how do we solve AI governance in the abstract? That's an incredibly hard thing to do. We say, okay, let's say if we automate customer service, we empower everyone to engineer with a coding agent or a co-pilot. Let's have our supply chain contract reviews done by AI. All of a sudden, you narrow the scope of what governance means, you narrow the risk. Right. Your chief compliance officer can say, okay, I understand the blast radius of this application. And all of a sudden, you get from these big abstract problems to much more solvable problems. And the more we go after these practical things, when you're in this discussion about AI governance 3 years from now, you've got 4 successful projects, hopefully no failed ones. And all of a sudden, you can have those bigger discussions. So I'm an engineer by trade.
Good roadmap, actually. Yeah. Let's take a look at the polling question and see how many folks in the audience are actually using agents. Okay, so we've got the vast majority saying that they're experimenting with them, which is fantastic. It sounds like that's the roadmap to get started. One other thing I want to ask you about, Bret, is that the technology around AI agents is changing so quickly. Thinking about reasoning models, for instance, that are supposed to be very important for advancing AI agents, doing things like chain of thought reasoning. But at the same time, how can companies like yours keep up with the pace of change as your customers need to ensure that you're providing them with the right set of governance and guardrails in place, because we all know that agents aren't necessarily reliable in all instances. So I want to ask you about DeepSeek, and its R1 model, the Chinese firm DeepSeek's sort of revolutionary R1 model, supposedly. What kind of impact do you think that technologies like R1 have on technologies like AI agents and for enterprises?
Well, first, it is the rate of change in the foundation models and frontier models is unlike anything I've ever experienced in my career. So it's hard for me as an insider to keep pace. I can't imagine what it's like for all of your teams as well. So just acknowledging that we're in a period of really rapid change. Just to give sort of like one metric of this rate of change, roughly 2 years ago, GPT-4 was the best frontier model available. And I might get these numbers slightly wrong, but it's roughly right, which was about $60 per million tokens of output. So that was sort of the cost of using that model. Tokens is sort of a weird metric, but it made it fairly expensive and fairly slow, which meant the applications of that technology were necessarily a bit narrow. If you have a fraud detection system that gets triggered, 100 million times a day, you probably wouldn't want to use that model to inspect fraud. It probably wouldn't be cost effective. Now, GPT-4o Mini, which by most evals is strictly better than GPT-4. I'm sure there might be some where it is not, but most it is 60 cents per million tokens. So that is over 100 times, more cost effective in a couple years. The Moore's Law, when I was growing up, we'd get a new computer. It was always better and cheaper, which was a really fun way to grow up as a computer geek, but it wasn't anything close to this pace. So one thing I always try to remind myself is if you look at the path from GPT-3 to now, including things like DeepSeek and O3 Mini, which OpenAI released recently, you're seeing this almost blistering pace of improved quality and dramatically decreasing costs. And one thing that as you're thinking about deploying AI is I think you should plan for that. I think that is, if you are planning for both the quality and the cost of models as they exist today, you're planning for the past. And that's sort of a weird thing to wrap your head around because it reminds me, I met a guy who made computer games in the 90s, and they'd joke that they were always testing the game on a computer that wasn't for sale yet, because by the time they were finished with game development, the graphics cards would be, that's kind of the way we are now. And so I think until we see around algorithms, compute, and data some structural reason why this will slow down, I think it is rational to plan for this dramatic increase in quality at dramatically less cost, which I think is really exciting. How we plan for it, we're an applied AI company at Sierra. We're not a research lab. We believe that one of our value propositions is governance, guardrails, and in particular, because we help companies like SiriusXM and Sonos and ADT build their customer experience, you shouldn't have to redefine or re-implement your customer experience every time a new model comes out. So one of the main values we provide is a durable way to implement your customer experience, the guardrails and the governance that can absorb this new technology but not require a new implementation. And I think if you just, Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. If the AI market rhymes with the cloud market, what we do at Sierra is like software as a service. What the models provide is more like infrastructure as a service, and there's trade-offs. You get more control if you build it yourself, but then you build it, you own it, right? And so software is like a lawn. It has to be maintained. And most of you probably have shifted more towards software as a service over the past decade as you've analyzed sort of total cost of ownership. I have a strong and obviously biased, but strong intuition that the same will happen in AI, that actually having your teams re-implement, re-prompt engineer, redo governance is actually not a cost that should be individually shared by every company in the world, but should be essentially abstracted by companies providing solutions to those problems. Anyway, I have a bunch of opinions on that, but that's my take, and I think there's a reason why software as a service exists, and there's a reason why applied AI agents,
Right.
I think, will be a meaningful category.
I do have a question for you around the sort of disruption of AI agents to software as a service, especially given your background at Salesforce. But I want to stick with OpenAI for a moment, where you're the chairman of the board, and just in this last day, we have this massive $97.4 billion takeover bid from the likes of Elon Musk and his group of investors. So tell us what's going on there, and how is OpenAI responding?
Well, I think most of you are aware OpenAI is a nonprofit, and what that means is the OpenAI board has a fiduciary duty to our mission exclusively, and our mission is to ensure that artificial general intelligence benefits all of humanity. So it's pretty simple for me, which is OpenAI is not for sale, and our job as a board is to exclusively decide what's benefits our mission, and as a consequence, I think this is largely a distraction, and I think the board's going to continue to exclusively focus on the mission.
So in what way is it a distraction from your mission of?
I just think, I mean, I guess OpenAI is not for sale, so there's a bunch of press, we're talking about it right now, which
right.
is one symptom of the
about it.
distraction. No, I understand, and my whole point is our job, it's interesting because we are mission driven, especially as a board, our job is very simple, which is to basically evaluate every strategic of the decision of the organization through that one test, which is, does this actually further the mission of ensuring AGI benefits humanity? And I have a hard time seeing how this would.
Okay, got it. Let's go back to agents. We have another polling question around what is your biggest concern around using AI agents? And one of the things that we talked about is, well, here we have one about, are agents the next big thing for AI? We can cover this too. A small majority say yes, definitely, which may be good news for Sierra. A slightly smaller group say maybe. And what's your primary concern around using AI agents inside your organization? Looks like most say reliability, followed by cybersecurity and data privacy. I know you've talked about having these sorts of guardrails in place, and Sierra being at the application layer kind of helps abstract that away from your customers. But again, to my question around AI agents hitting more of the mainstream, what do you find are the biggest sort of roadblocks to a company like maybe ADT or any of the others you mentioned saying, yeah, sure, we'll let agents sort of run amok, and what if something goes wrong? Does Sierra take the blame? Do I take the blame? How do you answer those sorts of questions?
I think that's the right worries. So I would have probably had, if you had polled me and I stack ranked, I probably would have had a very similar list to all of you. Reliability, I'll sort of break that down as the way I see it. Number one is simply robustness. Based on the guardrails that you want to impose for say, agentic conversation. Let's just take a retailer. We have lots of retailers who just went through Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Does the agent abide by your return policy? If someone has a warranty claim, does it abide by the rules of your warranty claim process? If someone asks for information on a product, does it give correct information or does it hallucinate? That's the base level, which is essentially, does it actually abide by the guardrails? This is not easy necessarily, but again, I do think that in the world of agents, one of my principles is, can you narrow the domain such that you can use existing technology to implement either deterministic guardrails or sufficiently accurate AI-based guardrails such that it meets your business requirements. And I do think for any given problem, if you can narrow the domain sufficiently, I think the answer is yes today. I think there's a more nuanced thing though. One of our first retailers sold shoes, and we worked with them on their agent, and they did a lot of post-purchase interactions like, where's my order returns and exchanges, warranty claims, things like that. And the first session was, I'm going to a wedding in Hawaii, what sandals will go with my bridesmaid dress? Which the AI was wholly not equipped to answer. It wasn't something that we contemplated in the design of it. And I think that one of the interesting things, if you look at all of your websites and mobile apps that you make for your partners, customers, sort of all your, or even employees as well, your website probably has like a menu on it, and probably with enough clicks, you could probably click around almost every page on the site, even for a site with like a large product catalog. you're essentially giving a multiple choice question to your visitors. What of these enumerated options do you want to visit? A conversational agent is a free-form text box. It's sort of like going from Yahoo directory to Google. For those of you who are my age who remember that, you go from like enumerating all the possibilities to something that's more free-form. And as a consequence, maybe pun intended, you're giving a lot more agency to your customers. They can say whatever they want. And so you end up with this much more distinct voice of your customer in those interactions where they will take your agent in directions you didn't anticipate. As a consequence, it feels much more interactive as you're building it out. You're seeing essentially customer demand play out in more interactive ways. But the other more nuanced thing that I've thought a lot about, and I think this will resonate with all the technologists in the room, if you think about the last big project you worked on, what percentage of the specification was in the requirements document and what percentage is simply the way it was implemented in code? And a huge percentage is actually in code today. Like the requirements cover the important stuff, but a lot of like what happens when you click this button and the internet's out, or some random corner case. There's some if statement in there that some engineer wrote that did something. And the whole of your product experience is both what you wrote down and just the way it was implemented. If you think of a world where this free-form text boxes becoming a key part of your experience that are much more free-form, the odds that you've specified every possible behavior is almost zero. You can't enumerate all of human interaction and specify what you want to happen. And so I think one of the more nuanced things we found in our customer base is what do you do in the scenarios where it goes off script?
Right.
Some of the answers are easy. If it's asking about something unrelated to your brand, say maybe politely redirect people back on topic. But I think there's actually a lot of things that are actually in that sort of zone of it wasn't quite in the standard operating procedure, but is clearly related to your brand. How much agency do you want to afford the AI? And I think this is an interesting kind of conversation with stakeholders in your business. It's an interesting just mindset shift, which is you can eliminate all agency from the agent and it becomes a robot, and it kind of eliminates the entire purpose of deploying the technology. Or you can say, okay, essentially where there is undefined behavior, we're going to let the AI reason and think. And you have to accept the premise that some of the time it may do something that you disagree with, that your stakeholder in the business disagrees with.
Sounds like a pretty big risk, though, right?
It is,
especially
and
for the enterprises.
I think it is a big risk, and I also think it's an opportunity. And I think that one of the things that I've always tried to remind myself is humans are flawed too, and not every employee at your company is making a perfect decision at every point. And we've created basically the right governance inside of our companies to mitigate those risks in a variety of ways. And I think that one of the mindset shifts I've found to be productive is don't wait for AI to be perfect to deploy it. Accept that it is imperfect. In fact, plan for its imperfections. So rather than say, will this AI do something wrong? Say, when it does something wrong, what are the operational mitigations that we've put in place to either maybe mitigate the compliance risk to deal with it? If you just think of most of your compliance controls for those of you in public companies, it assumes things will go wrong. I mean, no regulator is asking for companies to be perfect. What they're asking is you find out when something went wrong and how do you actually remediate the issue. I actually think it's a very constructive way of thinking about AI because often you'll actually have existing controls at your company you can reuse for your people.
Yeah.
And I think the companies that wait until AI is perfect will see their competitors vastly outpace them. And I think
I like that. Don't wait until your AI is perfect. That's all the time we have for our questions, but I want to make sure that we have time for one or two questions from the audience. And I see an individual in the back here wearing a dark sweater.
Hi, Bret. My name is Madhu Sudhakar. I'm the founder of Isera. Question for you. Are you heading towards competing with Mark Benioff to cut his licenses? Are you going to play nice with him? This is a Wall Street Journal event, so I want to hear the most provocative positioning of yours with Mark.
I thought I would be asking the most provocative questions. Go ahead.
I consider Mark one of my closest mentors in business. I don't know if you've ever had a boss that taught you more than you can even give them credit for. So I consider myself, just because the Super Bowl just happened, I consider myself a part of Mark Benioff's coaching tree. And he can take credit for all my success. So I'm very, as you all probably know, Salesforce, they use this term Ohana. I think I'll always be a part of the Salesforce Ohana.
We have time for maybe one or two more. This individual with the glasses here.
So I have a very surgical pointed question, but I want to provide you some context. Just bear with me for a second. You touched on DeepSeek, and DeepSeek achieved the performance that it achieved by doing compression, quantization, distillation, and what I also heard is they went into the assembly code and optimized the model by almost like breaking CUDA, which people thought it was insurmountable fortress. So with that context, in order for AI agents to spread like a virus, for every enterprise to deploy them, and it becomes pervasive and ubiquitous, if you were to sort, prioritize the top 3 technical challenges, what would those be? And I'll give you a hint. The wrong answer is probably like there are no challenges.
And you're talking about 4 foundation models and furthering the development of these frontier models? Yeah. I think there's 3 challenges that I think, thankfully, are somewhat independent challenges, which I think increases the likelihood that we will not get stuck in terms of progress. The first is data. So a lot of the models that produced ChatGPT and sort of created this wave of interest in large language models were trained on language and trained on text. Most of the available text has been used already. So probably the 2 interesting areas there are synthetic data generation and simulation are the 2 areas of research that I think are quite interesting. Probably given the time just ran out, I'll just leave it at that. But I think there's interesting research labs and companies working on both. The second is compute. I think there's 2 challenges. One is scaling out compute, and I think there's a ton of investment in infrastructure, and I do think that's one of those areas too where I think public-private partnership can help, just because I think no matter how efficient these models are, they still, quality of models still improves logarithmically with the investment in compute, and I think there's increasing the scale of our compute is important. The second thing you alluded to, which is making inference more efficient with techniques like distillation or a lot of other optimizations. And that means that you can either think longer if you want higher quality output, or have it run more efficiently depending on your goals. And the third of it is algorithmic. I think probably the most recent interesting breakthrough there was these reasoning models where companies are doing reinforcement learning on chains of thought. Before that, there was a lot of other breakthroughs, but certainly the transformers model and improving the parallelism of both training and inference was a huge breakthrough. And I can't tell you what the next one is, obviously, since that's like the whole idea is invention. But it is really interesting to me that in the past few years you had quite a few breakthroughs algorithmically, like the chain of thought that led to things like O3, like DeepSeek and others. When I mentioned they're independent, what's interesting about that is you can end up hitting plateaus in some models, like maybe we don't have another algorithmic breakthrough for another 12 months, but you can improve compute and you can improve data and still see a return on that investment. I think that's what's most promising as you're thinking about our path to something that represents generalizable intelligence is, I think, the optimizations and the challenges which do exist are not interlinked. And I think when you have scientific progress processes where you can truly get stuck, it's often because you have one problem you need to solve. And I think having 3 independent challenges to solve bodes well for the future of AI.